My Diabetes Journey, a Cautionary Tale. Not my tale, but from the author at Yale. Let's see. On the day after my 60th birthday, I had a medical emergency that may have saved my life. I was out celebrating with friends when I had what I later found out was a transient ischemic attack, a TIA, temporary blockage of blood flow to part of the brain, also known as a mini stroke. In the middle of dinner, I started saying and doing things that made no sense. I knew what I wanted to say to my friends, but I couldn't get the right words out. My friends decided that dinner was over, and they drove me to the hospital. That was pretty scary. Fortunately, the symptoms lasted only about an hour, and there was no permanent damage, according to the emergency department doctors, but the effect of that mini stroke was life-changing. More about that later. I'll start at the beginning. In 2006, when I was in my 40s, I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, one of the leading causes of the other type 3, which is cardiovascular disease, cancer, and neurodegenerative diseases, which is also known as type 3 diabetes to many. Chronic disorder in which my body was unable to properly use insulin, resulting in high blood glucose levels. This is not entirely true. It's kind of misleading saying unable to properly use insulin. Well, it's using it exactly as it's designed to when you're eating too much carbohydrates, which turn to glucose, which elevates glucose in your blood. And here, because he's type 2 diabetic, we know this is a case of too much glucose in the blood. This isn't like type 1 diabetes, which is also high glucose in the blood, but it's as a result of the pancreas not being able to produce insulin. In this case, it's too much glucose, which in turn has the body create more insulin to try to get the glucose out of the blood, but the cells are ignoring the insulin, not letting the glucose in to protect themselves from dying. Those elevated levels can lead to a number of serious health issues if they're not managed properly, often a difficult task to those with the condition. Diabetes patients and their physicians have to find the right balance of medication, diet, and exercise to maintain good blood sugar levels without letting them get too high or too low, which can be just as dangerous. If you've been following my channel and been watching other videos, you'll see a common theme when it comes to type 2 diabetes, which is find the right balance of medication, diet, and exercise, which is very vague. Medication is not necessarily for type 2 diabetes. Obviously, if you're on medication, don't stop your medication, work with your doctor. But type 2 diabetes is completely reversible for almost all people when doing the carnivore diet because it is a disease of too much glucose. And so when you do carnivore, you're not eating any carbohydrates, aka sugar. And so your body's able to work things out. Not taking insulin, which gives more insulin, which causes more insulin resistance. Continuing the type 2 diabetes, there's no cure. It's just making things worse. Up until I had the mini stroke in November 21, my diabetes was, as doctors say, completely uncontrolled. AKA, he didn't know about it, or it was being treated. I've had a lifelong affair with sugar, and I ate as much ice cream, candy, and carbohydrates as I wanted, despite knowing that I was diabetic and how that behavior would affect my blood glucose levels. Yeah, most type 2 diabetics, it's a result of carb addiction. You want to call it a love affair, you can, but it's really an addiction for most people. After all, I felt fine. I'd been blessed with good health for most of my life. In hindsight, I guess I was trying to prove to myself that diabetes was not going to change everything, was not going to change anything. Even worse than my diet was the fact that I didn't take my medications regularly. I figured if I was eating so badly anyway, what was the point? Doesn't make it worse if you don't take your medication unless you're still eating sugar like he did. So had he stopped eating carbs, he wouldn't have needed the medication. Most likely. Of course, work with your doctor. But as I've come to learn, and you'll read below, diabetes can be an insidious disease. You can be without symptoms for years and feel completely fine. This is a situation where your glucose is chronically high, but your insulin is taking care of things, which shows you a normal blood sugar glucose test and your blood test. Your blood sugar can be showing as 100 and you think, oh, I'm fine. Meanwhile, your insulin is chronically high all the time, just trying to batten down the hatches and keep your blood glucose normal. But there comes a time when that insulin production levels out and starts to decline, which then, because it's not regulating the glucose anymore, it's unable to properly, the body's just resisting it altogether. glucose goes up, and then you start seeing higher glucose levels, which they call prediabetes and diabetes, which are basically the same thing. But once the complications of diabetes start to take hold, and eventually they can affect virtually every area of your health. That's because excessive sugar in your blood damages blood vessels and nerves throughout your body. That's true. Type 2 diabetes is a disease of excess sugar. The three most common complications of diabetes involve damage to the nerves, neuropathy, the eyes, retinopathy, and the kidneys, nephropathy. As a result of my poor diabetes management, I ended up having all three of these complications. Yeah, and what's scary is you can have kidney failure even with normal blood glucose levels. So you have to keep that in mind. Don't just eat what you want, do what you want, looking for the quote-unquote prediabetes to where you start taking things serious. It could already be serious. You just don't know because you're not properly testing for it. We'll get to that later. From tingling feet to eye injections. The first diabetes symptoms I felt, which began around 2010, was a mild tingling or pins and needles feeling in my feet. Over time, this gradually worsened and became numbness in portions of my feet, a condition known as peripheral neuropathy, which results from damage to the nerves located outside of the brain and spinal cord. Yeah, because of all that sugar, nerves and everything start getting damaged, which can also later be a result of cholesterol going up because it's trying to repair the damage. More than half of the people with diabetes will develop some type of neuropathy. Many experience sharp stabbing pains in their feet. I'm fortunate that I've never had that. I've just experienced numbness and cold feet due to diabetes-related circulation problems. So the neuropathy never really bothered me. I rationalized that I could easily live with a little numbness in my feet. Yeah, there's an old joke where, who was it? Patrice O'Neill said, you know, he had diabetes. He passed away as a result of type 2 diabetes. And he said the addiction is so strong to carbs that he was just he's trying to rationalize between eating cookies and losing a foot. And he thought to himself, the addiction rationalized with him and thought, well, I only need 1 foot. So this is him pretty much rationalizing the same type of thing because of his addiction to sugar. The really worrisome complications of diabetes started about 6 years ago. After a routine dilated eye exam, I was told I had the beginning of diabetic retinopathy and was advised to see a retina specialist as soon as possible. Unnecessary. Just stop eating carbs. I've always been very squeamish about my eyes, so I put that off and retreated into my familiar world of denial. Then one autumn evening, about a year later, I was having dinner outdoors with friends. She said, "Look at those stars. There's the Big Dipper." I looked up, and all I saw was black sky, no stars. I mean, don't get me wrong, but it kind of seems like this article is trying to kind of scare us into seeing a doctor, getting regular checkups. Don't ignore the warning signs, which is true, but just cut out carbs. That scared me. I finally went to a retina specialist, and sure enough, by that time, I had fairly advanced retinopathy. Diabetic retinopathy occurs when too much sugar is in the blood, leads to blockages in tiny blood vessels that nourish the retina, the light-sensitive tissue in the back of the eye. As a result, these vessels can start to leak fluid. You see a common theme here. Too much sugar, too much sugar. So just stop eating sugar. I'm going to keep repeating that because it's super important. It's so easy, but so simple, but not easy to do because carbs are so addictive. But we'll get to that. In some cases, they can close off completely and the eye attempts to grow new blood vessels, but these new vessels don't develop properly and can leak or bleed easily, which can lead to a buildup of fluid called edema in the macula, the center portion of the retina. If left untreated, these macular edemas can cause permanent vision loss. And we know that we do hear stories of people losing their vision with type 2 diabetes. Sometimes laser treatments are used to stop or slow the leakage in the eye. Another treatment involves injecting medications into the eye to help stop growth of new blood vessels and decrease blood fluid buildup. I was told that injections would be the best option for me. Or stop eating sugar. I'm so sensitive about my eyes that I've never even worn contact lenses. Now I was faced with the prospect of literally getting needles in my eyes. But thanks to topical anesthesia that numbs the eye and a very kind retina specialist, it wasn't that bad. I've been getting the injections for several years now, and it's gotten easier over time. It's amazing what you can get used to, especially when the alternative is potentially going blind. I do hope by the end of this, he's learned that he can just stop eating carbs and reverse almost everything, if not everything. I mean, I don't know how far along This damages after doing injections for several years, but I can say it's safe to assume it hasn't helped. It's just been mitigating the symptoms. Gastroparesis, another warning sign. In addition to developing neuropathy and eye problems, I was hospitalized twice within a 6-month period in 2017 and 18 for uncontrolled vomiting. I was throwing up relentlessly every 5 or 10 minutes, even after I no longer had any food in my stomach. I wonder if this is from the meds. While I never received a definitive diagnosis, meaning most likely it was from medication, the cause, according to my doctor, was most likely gastroparesis, a condition in which the stomach does not empty properly. Gastroparesis can occur when high blood sugar damages the enteric nerve system, which governs the functions of the gastrointestinal tract. Digestion slows down and food stays in your body longer than it should. Symptoms can include heartburn, nausea, vomiting, abdominal bloating, and feeling full quickly when eating. The 2 times I was hospitalized for uncontrolled vomiting, I came in with blood sugar levels of around 500 milligrams per deciliter, which is extremely high, to say the least. Desired blood sugar levels for diabetics are around 100 when fasting, first thing in the morning, and under 180 or 1 to 200 after a meal. If you do carnivore, you can get it down to 80 or 80 to 90 or even less when fasting. And you will keep it under 105, sometimes even 100, 1 or 2 hours after a meal because you're just eating protein and fat. The main way that clinicians monitor your long-term blood sugar control is through a hemoglobin A1C test, which measures your average blood sugar level over the past 3 months, usually most likely the last 2 months. When sugar enters the bloodstream, it attaches to hemoglobin, a protein in your red blood cells. The A1C test measures the percentage of your red blood cells that have sugar-coated hemoglobin. The higher your A1C, the higher your likelihood of developing complications from diabetes, or the high likelihood of developing diabetes in the first place. Everything about diabetes is complicated. For most diabetics, the goal is for your A1C to be under 7. Holy cow, that is not true. You want it under 5.5. As close to 5 as possible. Even 5.9, you're headed in the wrong direction. 7, this is just nuts. But this article is from 2022, so I'll give them a pass because we know a lot more now. I'm thinking at least most people online know more about this now than they did 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago. For most of that time, I had had diabetes. My A1C level was in the 13, 14 range and occasionally even higher, reflecting an average blood sugar level of about 325 to 350. Now, keep in mind, he's type 2 diabetic, so not type 1, which is usually genetic, or like I said, it involves the pancreas being unable to produce insulin to regulate blood glucose. But for this, just cut out carbs. Each time I was hospitalized, doctors told me that I was playing with fire and that such high A1C levels were extremely dangerous. I believed them and vowed to change, and absolutely meant it. But then I would feel stressed, anxious, angry, or sad, and in that moment, Ben & Jerry's ice cream was more important to me than long-term consequences of diabetes. So he clearly had an addiction, because this is how addiction works. It hijacks your brain to believe that the addictive substance or behavior is essential for your survival. It pretty much takes over your hunger and reproductive needs or urges. This is why people who have serious addiction will forfeit life pretty much in their family for the addictive substance or behavior. I need relief now, I told myself, and I still have plenty of time to get my act together and lower my A1C. This will be my last sugar binge, and tomorrow I will start taking care of myself. Just stop eating carbs. Now, obviously, if you're on medication, if you're taking insulin therapy, work with your doctor. You do not want to cut out carbs if you're on insulin medication, because that'll drive your blood sugar far too low and can be very dangerous, or if not fatal. So if you want to do carnivore, which I highly recommend, if you want to get rid of your type 2 diabetes and probably many other issues as a result of having that and medication, work with your doctor. If he doesn't want to work with you, fire him, get a new one. Your life depends on it, your well-being, your quality of life. Very important. Please try carnivore. Not going to stop saying that. But hundreds of last binges were gradually destroying my health. Peripheral neuropathy and amputation, a real possibility. Whew. Remember how I said that a little numbness in my feet didn't bother me? Turns out I was wrong about that too. The danger of peripheral neuropathy is that you don't feel pain in your feet, so you may have a foot injury or infection and not realize it. Damage to blood vessels caused by high blood sugar slows blood flow to the feet, increasing odds that small injuries will become infected. It also slows wound healing. So yeah, that's another thing. If you find your wounds are healing very slowly, that's something to look at. There's other signs, of course, high blood pressure and all these other things. These are things that are always usually linked with prediabetes, diabetes, insulin resistance, quote unquote. So yeah, be very mindful of that. Summer of 2020, I was attending an annual family gathering in upstate New York when I noticed a small cut on my toe. I washed it out, put some Neosporin on it, slapped on a Band-Aid, and forgot about it. A few weeks later, a friend pointed out that my foot was bleeding. I turned my foot over and discovered a very large open wound on the underside of my big toe. It was clearly infected. The open part of the wound was a yellowish green, and the toe itself was red and swollen. That must really hurt, my friend said, but I didn't feel anything. Even though I still did not fully grasp the gravity of the situation, I went to the local urgent care center. As soon as the doctor and nurse saw my infected toe, I could tell from the looks on their faces that this was serious. At one point, the doctor used a scalpel to cut away some of the dead skin around the wound, and he warned me that it would hurt. He seemed shocked when I didn't even flinch. I couldn't feel a thing. I was treated with strong antibiotics and told to see a podiatrist as soon as possible, which I did. At the appointment, when the doctor examined my toe, I said jokingly, "It's not like I'm going to have my toe amputated, right?" I was shocked when he said, "Amputation is a real possibility. We'll have to wait and see." If the infection had spread to the bone, she explained, I would probably lose my toe. She took a series of x-rays, and luckily the infection had not spread to the bone. But I was not out of the woods. She told me that if I did not significantly lower my blood sugar levels, the wound on the toe would never heal, and if it never healed, the toe would likely eventually have to be removed. So in addition to wearing a special boot and treating my foot as the podiatrist prescribed, I started to eat right, take my medications, and monitor my blood sugar regularly. Curious to know what he means by eat right. And miraculously, my toe started to heal. It was the first time I had such a dramatic example of cause and effect when it came to blood sugar. And this is also this misleading aspect of taking medication, giving you more insulin that your cells are ignoring to try and regulate blood sugar because you're still eating carbs when you're taking medication. And so, yeah, you do have some benefit, the excess insulin, because your body is no longer able to keep up. They give you more insulin so that you can bring down your glucose, your blood glucose. So you get all encouraged that everything's working, but it's not. It's just getting worse. And your insulin will just keep having to get bumped up over time. The good news is that my toe made a complete recovery. The bad news is that once my toe was completely healed, I went back to my old ways of eating and not taking my medication regularly. More diabetes wake-up calls. I've had many rock bottom moments since I was first diagnosed with diabetes, but somehow getting injections in my eye and almost losing my big toe still weren't enough to motivate me to make long-term changes. Hopefully, by the end of this, he realized he had an addiction and started treating his addiction. Not with drugs, obviously, but once you identify that you have a carb addiction, you need to then approach it as an addiction, which is completely different than just saying, I'm not going to eat carbs anymore, I'm going to eat right. No, it's not that easy. You have to understand how to deal with addiction. So if you don't have experience with an addiction, in dealing with an addiction, everyone has probably an addiction or two. But if you're not used to it, you're not going to know how to approach it. So you're going to just keep failing and failing, feeling bad about yourself, feeling shame, feeling like a weak person, all these things. You're just not setting yourself up to win because you don't know how. So we'll get to that by the end. More wake-up calls came in 21 and 22. The first involved muscle loss. Yeah, because usually a lot of these diabetic diets are plant-based, whole meat, eating whole wheat and all this other crap, low protein, low fat, when it needs to be the complete opposite. But they give you that because they're giving you insulin medication. They don't want to give you insulin medication and then tell you to eat the foods that stop the disease because, like I said, if you take insulin and you're not eating sugar, you can have a hypoglycemic emergency. So for a number of years, my legs were gradually becoming weaker when I walked, especially upstairs or hills. I'm actually curious, if he was also maybe taking a statin. Maybe he had high cholesterol along with this. A lot of times, someone will have type 2 diabetes and cholesterol because statins can actually really mess up your muscles, get muscle atrophy. When I walked, especially upstairs in hills, my legs would burn as if I just had an intense workout. problem was compounded by lower back pain. Again, these are all side effects of medication and not addressing the actual issue. By summer 21, I was just walking to my mailbox was painful, and walk longer than that became impossible. I've always loved walking along the country lanes near my summer cottage. Now I couldn't even walk to my neighbor's house. Till I talked about it with my primary care doctor, it never occurred to me that the problem could have anything to do with my diabetes. And no, you know what? I give him credit. He's taking his meds. He's doing everything his doctor says. So why would he think this has anything to do with diabetes? I mean, he's listening to his doctor, so everything should be good. But it turns out there could be several diabetes-related causes, including a decline in skeletal muscle mass known as diabetic myopathy. Another possible cause could be peripheral artery disease, a circulatory problem which narrowed arteries reduce blood flow to the legs. Yeah, and this narrowed arteries is a result of the insulin resistance, which is a natural process. It's not a disease. The issue is carbohydrates in the diet for him, and, especially excessive amounts of carbohydrate. And this narrowing of arteries is called by the fact that your arteries cannot expand. They're not elastic, and this is caused by excess insulin. Making things worse was the fact that I was having to balance problems and felt unsteady, which was a result of the neuropathy in my feet. Then last November, I had the mini stroke. It was the combination of that and finding it so difficult to walk that it finally scared me to my core. With the help of some tough love from families and friends, I realized that if I didn't change my ways, I would be an invalid or dead within a very short time. So I completely changed my diet, took my medications as directed, back to the medications, and started seeing a therapist to help me with my food issues. Very good. But the biggest shock was still to come. Yeah, because you kept eating carbs in moderation. Famous quote by Shaitan. Kidney disease, the rock bottom moment. While I was in the hospital for my mini stroke, I was given a diagnosis of acute kidney injury. Acute. I was referred to a nephrologist, but I felt sure this was the one-time incident caused by dehydration. Still not seeing this as diabetes. My primary care doctor had mentioned in the past that I had elevated protein levels in my urine, but until my hospitalization, it had never seemed like an urgent situation. After conducting urine and blood tests, the nephrologist informed me that I had chronic kidney disease. Complication, they keep calling these complications. This is just diabetes. It's doing what it's supposed to do. If you light a fire and let it burn, it's doing what it's supposed to do. And you keep putting fuel in it, it's going to keep burning. It's not complicated. When high blood sugars damage the tiny vessels that act as filters in the kidneys, over time the kidneys lose their filtering ability. Worse yet, I later found out that I had stage 4 kidney disease, with stage 5 being kidney failure. Once the kidneys fail, I would require either a kidney transplant or dialysis, which is no fun. A friend of mine had to have this done. I think it was 3 or 4 hours a day, 3 days a week. Much more difficult than not eating carbs, in my opinion. Or maybe not. Maybe the addiction is that real for some people. Procedure to remove waste products and excess fluid from the blood when the kidneys can no longer perform those functions. Diabetes is the leading cause of kidney failure. And by the way, my friend's kidneys failed because as far as the doctor was concerned, he was doing fine because he was getting his blood glucose test. His doctor didn't say you have diabetes. So it wasn't his fault. And this happens to so many people. So I was stunned. Kidney damage cannot be reversed. All you can do is try to keep it from getting worse. In addition to controlling my blood sugar, I was prescribed a number of medications to lower my blood pressure and potassium levels, both of which contribute to the progression of kidney disease. I had to avoid high potassium foods like bananas, tomatoes, avocados, and oranges. My nephrologist said that she would work with me to try to avoid dialysis, or at least put it off for as long as possible. But in most cases, stage 4 kidney disease eventually progresses to stage 5. Especially if you keep eating carbohydrates and taking insulin. Insulin in those high amounts and glucose together, it's all toxic. It's destroying your body. Perhaps the greatest blow came when my nephrologist referred me to an evaluation to see if I would need a suitable candidate for a kidney transplant. My walls of denial came crashing down, and I was overwhelmed by the seriousness of my situation. A kidney transplant? I'm not ready for that, I told her. She explained that it can take an average of 7 years to get a donated kidney from a diseased organ donor. So while I may never need a transplant, it's best to start the process as soon as possible. During my evaluation, I learned that it's actually preferable to get a kidney from a living donor, if possible, because they generally last longer. So I now found myself embarking on another journey, one that I never would have envisioned for myself, looking for a kidney donor. And this is because this is what addiction does. It blinds you to the consequences. It gets you hooked. It rewires your brain and gets you hooked on doing these things as feeling as though it's a act of necessity. This is why you hear a lot of people saying, oh, I can never do carnivore. I can never do keto. What kind of life is not eating fruit and not eating carbs and bread and rice? Well, it's a life without losing your eyesight, your foot, having all these issues, losing your kidneys, having high blood pressure, gaining weight, being out of shape, not being able to play with your kids, not having the strength to defend you and your family. These are all the outcomes. It seems a lot harder than following a carnivore diet. Living well with diabetes. Oof, that's a oxymoron. Living well with diabetes. Why would you want to live with diabetes? Looking back, I wish I had taken my diabetes seriously and taken control of my blood sugar a lot sooner. But considering everything, I've been very lucky. I didn't sustain permanent damage from my mini stroke. I still have fairly good vision thanks to those eye injections. I still have all my toes. My heart seems to be in good shape, and I'm alive. For all of those things, I'm extremely grateful. Let's see what he ended up doing with the carbs. But there's a price to be paid for many years of poor diabetic management. No, it's many years of eating carbs. I take a ridiculous number of medications, and most weeks I have multiple medical appointments. I'm on a low sugar, low salt, and low potassium diet. Well, the low sugar part's good. I still have trouble walking, and I'm guessing the low salt is for his high blood pressure, which, by the way, is not caused by too much salt. It's caused by too much carbs. I still have trouble walking. I'll probably be getting injections in my eyes for the rest of my life, and there's a very good chance that I'll require dialysis and/or kidney transplant in the future. My most recent A1 test, I was down to 7.2, by far the lowest I've ever been. It's a huge improvement from 13 that I had when I was in the hospital for my mini stroke. When I have my next test, hopefully my A1C will be below 7, the recommended level for people with diabetes. Oh, so they're saying so below 7 is what they recommend for people with diabetes. So, okay, so they are saying that 7 is diabetes. That's good. I thought they were saying this was the normal range previously. My bad. But yeah, you want it as close to 5 or below. As close to 5 as possible, preferably below if possible. I've only had about 7 months of good blood sugar control after 15 years of poor diabetic management, but it's a start. For now, I'm just taking things one day at a time and taking some measure of comfort in knowing what it feels like to finally take care of myself. So, moral of the story is to not eat carbs. If you are having issues, if you're pre-diabetic, go carnivore. If you don't feel your best, if you don't feel mentally sharp, if you feel you have brain fog, if you wake up tired, if you don't have much energy, if you try and go to the gym and you don't have much energy, part of that could be out of shape, but for the most part, it's the carbs. The carbs put you on a blood sugar roller coaster, and it damages your blood vessels over time. It's a very sneaky disease, diabetes, that is. And so when you take medication for diabetes, imagine diabetes being a sink that's overflowing. You have the water pouring out of the sink. Now, the medication, what it does is it provides a bucket under the sink to catch the water. And then every few hours, you get another bucket. And then a few hours later, you get another bucket, and so on and so on. And this is how you're dealing with an overflowing sink. When what you want to do is stop the water from flowing. You don't want more buckets. You don't want medication, something that just provides more and more and more and more buckets, because that will temporarily seem like it's helping things. But you can use your imagination. You can imagine what will happen in your house if you keep adding buckets. So what is the solution? Turn off the water. It's that simple. Then if you have to use some water, you use a little bit of water and turn it off. That's what carnivore diet is. You're getting meat, you're getting high fat, no carbs, close to zero as possible. If you have an addiction, you work your way as close to zero as possible. But you're eating good amount of protein and high fat. And what happens is as long as you're getting adequate protein on a carnivore diet, you'll get those little hills and valleys of insulin. You get the little bump in insulin, which is fine, which is healthy. Insulin's good. It's not a bad thing. And this will give you enough insulin to retain your electrolytes and to stay hydrated. What a lot of people do on carnivore is they don't eat enough protein. So then they start having heart palpitations and all kinds of issues, and then they blame carnivore. So if you're having any kind of what they call metabolic dysfunction, do carnivore. There are millions of people who've changed their lives for the better that have done carnivore. You can look it up. I'm going to start doing videos on carnivore. Maybe I'll start doing some meals. I just started again a couple of weeks ago. I myself have a carb addiction. So, don't get it twisted. I'm not sitting here on a high horse telling you, why don't you stop quitting carbs? I have a carb addiction that I struggle with. So I'm trying to work on that and stick to carnivore. I did do carnivore once. I think the longest I did it was a month and a half, and it was amazing. That's why I keep going back to it. It's life altering. So if you find you cannot stop eating carbs, and you find yourself always having excuses to eat carbs, it's an addiction. It's not you. It's not your fault. Don't feel bad about it, but approach it like an addiction. And so I have videos on addiction that you can check out. I'm going to be doing more strategies on how to control addiction. For most of us who have long-term addictions, they don't really ever go away. They just lie dormant, waiting for us to get stressed out or tired. But like I said, check out my series on addiction. I have a lot of strategies that I use to control several addictions. And so, I hope this was beneficial. If it has been, please share, subscribe, tick the bell if you want to be notified when I post. And inshallah, share in the reward. Get this out to as many as possible. The Ummah's health is just deteriorating rapidly. We're becoming the leaders in bad health around the world, and we need to change it, inshallah. So till next time, may Allah reward you for being curious, and keep tying your camel. Assalamu alaikum.